Welcome into the Autzen Audibles podcast. Erik Skopil on the show. I'm your host, Matt Prehm. It's Transfer Portal Palooza, if you want to call it that. It's been open for a week, and we've talked on this show with Jared, also Jared Mack on the show as well, just kind of portal needs, portal targets, maybe to early names to know. A week later, and there's been movement. Offers have been made. Guys have made official visits to Oregon. And now we have two verbal commitments to this recruiting class for the Ducks. The first one is maybe the biggest ad by anybody in the portal right now. Dillon Thieneman, a safety from Purdue, Big Ten Freshman Defensive Player of the Year in 2023, was on a team that was purely simply terrible this past year, and that overshadowed his impact that he had on that team. It's just another reminder that this is a sport that you can have one of the best young players at the position, and if you don't have talent around him, it's hard for him to truly make the full impact. Purdue was better last year; he had a better year. They've also added Theen Johnson, another Big Ten All-Conference selection, a second-team All-Big Ten cornerback from Northwestern. We'll dive into both of those additions and how they impact the Ducks and what moves forward. But Erik, let's start with Dillon Thieneman. This is maybe the best portal ad, like I said, by any school so far. His pedigree is unmatched, and he slides right into a secondary that will lose both its starting safeties. And now all of a sudden, which feels like probably for the fourth year in a row, Dan Lanning's going to have a potential one-and-done portal ad in the secondary that goes off to the NFL.
Yeah, that's what kind of player this is, Matt. I mean, this is last year when I was doing my kind of like summer research on the players on opposing teams, and I was looking through PFF in a couple different places, and this guy leapt out. I'm not having watched the Big Ten or Purdue certainly very much in 2023 or seasons before. Wasn't really familiar with this guy, but he was the number one graded safety in the country as a true freshman based on PFF grades. Had over 100 tackles as a true freshman. He had 6 turnovers forced as a true freshman. Was, as you said, an All-American, freshman All-American, Big Ten defensive freshman of the year. I mean, all of the accolades were there for this guy. And to get him, he's only going to be 1 or 2 year guy. He comes in as a junior. He's played 2 years. This is awesome for Oregon. This is a big addition. I wrote in my kind of breakdown and my thoughts on it, like this is the best, I think, athlete for the safety position Oregon's had since Javon Holland. That doesn't necessarily mean he's the best. Verone McKinley was a really good.
Strong words, high praise.
Yeah, well, I mean, because you kind of go through it. And again, I don't want to take too many shots here because like Verone McKinley was an incredibly productive player. I think he was an All-American.
Right.
Does not quite have the same level of juice athletically, just running east to west, and the size, at 5'11", close to 210 pounds. This is an NFL player who, the safety position isn't necessarily valued the same way as corner, but like whether it's after the 25 season or after 26, like I fully expect, based upon the player who he was to start his career, this is a guy who's like the first, second, or third safety off the board. And that might make him a first round pick. That might make him a second or a third round pick, but I fully expect he's that kind of a player. Yeah. And this is a big ad because, again, I mean, Oregon this year, I think the safeties played pretty darn well. I don't know if they're really challenged very much, though. And that might be something we see coming up here in the playoff against some of these more explosive pass offenses. But this is a guy who is very capable of being a difference maker, whether it be finishing plays with, bone crushing tackles or coming across and making a play on a receiver as like a help defender to knock it away or even pick it off. Like this is just a big time athlete who I know is really well thought of in the Midwest. This was a guy, by the way, I think it came down to Oregon, Ohio State, and he picked the Ducks over the Buckeyes. This is becoming an unusual trend, but one that I know in Columbus is not very popular. But to go head to head with them for a kid that grew up in Indiana and to win. And by the way, the other guy we're going to talk about, I know Ohio State wasn't necessarily in that recruitment, but Theen Johnson also from Indiana, and they went in there and snagged him from a bunch of Big Ten schools that were obviously interested. So it's kind of interesting the dynamic of going and grabbing the best defensive players off of 2 really bad Big Ten teams. Like I was looking at Purdue and Northwestern went 2-16 combined in the Big Ten, which is very bad. And the one of those 2 wins was against the other team. So they won 1 combined game against teams that weren't each other in conference play this year. Both of these guys now have an opportunity to take a step up and play for a conference championship caliber program that is the reigning Big Ten champs. So I think you're seeing the immediate returns of this season in the portal with these 2 guys, and by the way, the immediate returns of having this kind of track record now, as you kind of alluded to, Matt, with you bring in this highly regarded defensive back, he comes in, has a good season, draft stock goes up, and he goes off into the NFL. So I think all of that played in Oregon's favor, and they got 2 really good players, and Thieneman in particular is somebody who's like, this is going to be a plug-and-play starter, probably one of your best defensive, maybe your best defensive back next year, with a chance to be a guy who's off the board early in the draft in 25.
Yeah, this is I put 0 stock in any concern of these guys coming from poor Big Ten teams and coming to Oregon and being able to thrive. It's just you're going to surround them with better players, and they're going to have to do less on a defense because there's better talent around them, which will allow them to really hone in on the things that they do really well, which will make them even better players for Oregon on next season on the football field. Dillon Thieneman is this is, I think, the sign that we've already kind of known this, but Oregon is a destination portal move because you look at the guys that have come through Oregon. It started with Christian Gonzalez and then Kyrie Jackson and Evan Williams, and now it's going to be Jabbar Muhammad that will probably find himself on an NFL roster next season. Kobe Savage probably has an opportunity to do the same.
Nico Reed.
I was just going to bring that up. Nico Reed is the next one, a guy that has flourished in his second year. If you want to play at a high level, win championships or compete for championships, and improve your draft stock as a portal guy, like Lanning has shown the track record now in 3 years that this is like one of the destination places. And this is kind of what you envisioned when you hired him as head coach, was let's create this narrative that good defensive players want to come play at Oregon. And this is just another example of that. It's a huge need. It's a huge fit. And I think low key, like why this is important too, is it gives you a bridge year where Kingston Lopa, Peyton Woodyard, Aaron Flowers, incoming freshman Trey McNutt, if they're ready to play next season, they're ready, and that's great. But now you don't need 2 of them to be ready as your starter because, Ty Turner's gone. He's left the program. He's Oregon's most experienced player at the safety position that's not a starter. You needed to add some experience, and if Thieneman is here for 2 years, that makes you better. But if he's only here for a year, it's going to give Oregon a bridge for its underclassmen just to get another year of seasoning, another year of processing football and development from a skill standpoint, from a physicality standpoint. And it doesn't force a defense to rely on true freshmen or redshirt freshmen next season. And a year in which, history has shown Dan Lanning doesn't plays freshmen all that much. And they were in a position where they were going to have to, unless they added portal guys.
That's a great point. And I think to build off that, also just now you have an experienced veteran in that room. You know what I mean? Because as you said, you were maybe going to have to start a couple of guys who were first or second year players. Now, not only do you not have to start one, you've got a guy in that room who's been through it. He'll have to learn this defense and all that goes with it. But in terms of just somebody who's been highly productive, from an early age, which maybe is great to have around some of these players, if somebody who's I was the best player in this conference a couple of years ago from a freshman perspective. I was a freshman All-American. For some of these younger guys to go, okay, it's possible. Let me kind of show you how to do it. Let me show you the way. And frankly, and just one last thought on him, because I know people will go and look and say, well, you guys have talked about a lot of his freshman season, what happened as a sophomore. The production from a tackles perspective was about the same. I think he finished with a couple more, a couple less. I can't remember. It was 104 one year, 106 the other. he did not have the impact from a turnover takeaway perspective. He didn't have any this year. And the PFF grades did drop because he was like a 90 PFF grade, which again is elite. There are very few players above like 85 in college football and PFF grades. And he fell to like somewhere in the high 60s, low 70s. So not as productive of a year, but I kind of explained it away similar to what Matt said is he was on a really bad, historically bad Big Ten team that played like a bunch of teams that are going to be in the playoff or teams that were ranked in that kind of range, and they got blasted in all of them. And I don't put this all on him. I will say, I do remember when Oregon played Purdue, like he had a little bit of a difficult time against Theen Johnson in the open field, but I haven't watched every.
A lot of people.
I was going to say, having watched all these conference, all these good teams in this conference as well, not a lot of teams have an answer for him. So I wanted to bring that up because I'm sure there are people who are going to say, well, his sophomore season wasn't quite as good. And I think that's probably just factually accurate. I also say, not to explain it all away this way, but he's playing on a really, really bad team that, frankly, by like mid-October knew it maybe wasn't winning another game. And that's not to say it's great that they kind of called it quits, but I kind of feel like that's more of what it is as opposed to somebody who regressed or something. I think he'll be reinvigorated by entering a place like this that has really good players around him and that has a chance to actually go win some games, because that has to be discouraging if you're playing on a team and you're like, I know I'm an NFL caliber player and we might win like 2 games all season.
Yeah. Oh, and it's not just him at Purdue that's been highly sought of in the portal. They've had a couple other guys that have emerged that have quickly landed at spots. So there were a lot of issues that were above a player's area of blame for Purdue's lack of success last season. All right, let's transition now to Theen Johnson. Sticking in the Big Ten, I guess, sticking in the state of Illinois, middle of the country. He snuck into Eugene for an official visit this past weekend. He committed during his trip to Eugene, announced it on Sunday afternoon. And this is another edition, one of those sneaky ads, Eric, that like I look at Nico Reed, I look at Brandon Johnson this year from Duke, to stay in the secondary, I guess. 2 guys that when they committed, it was like, oh, great, this looks like a depth piece. This looks like a really solid contributor. But when you start peeling back the layers, you start doing your research, you start looking into who this player is, you quickly realize this guy's got a chance to maybe do something at Oregon. And I think Theran fits that same mold as previous additions. He's a versatile player. I'm sure you're going to talk about. He can play all over the secondary. It wouldn't surprise me. And this is an all-conference Big Ten selection. And this is where you go back to like where Oregon is just at a different level right now. And there are a few schools that can match it where they can go out and then you can just go, look, your best player in this area, he's going to come play for us now because we're throwing our hat into the ring. And this is another big addition, another area where Oregon's going to lose, I think, 4 of its top 5 corners this season. And you need depth, you need talent. And to your point about Dillon Thieneman, like you need experience, you need vets to show the younger guys how to do things. Johnson crosses all those boxes off.
Yeah, 5th year, by the way. So this is a true one-and-one, a true plug-and-play gap or bridge player like Matt used earlier to describe Thieneman. I think this is a player. I like those comps you made to guys that were – because this is like I think going to be a 3-star basically on the transfer portal rankings. I think he's the 18th ranked corner. You could kind of shrug your shoulders and go, well, he wasn't the number 1. Why aren't they going after the better corners? Why are they settling for this guy? But this is a really productive player. He led the Big Ten in passes defended. That's a combination of pass deflections and interceptions. He had 12 of those. Really explosive, as you said, Matt. I think some positional versatility maybe gives you the option to see if you can be multiple and play both he and Brandon out there at the same time. Brandon Johnson, could be kind of similar in that role potentially too. But I think one of the things that stood out just kind of looking at this is they've recruited all these big, long, rangy high school guys that are like 6'2", 6'3", and in the portal they just kind of settle in with these productive guys who don't have those elite measurables. I think he's 5'11", 185. Like this kind of you just kind of pointed out, like it kind of does remind me of that Nico Reed, Brandon Johnson guy, where you go, well, physically he's not the sexy 6'2", 6'3" big guy necessarily, but super productive. Has played a lot of football. I think he has 26 career starts, and I think somebody who, like, I know he gave up a fair amount of catches and yards and stuff. I think I was looking at PFF, the second most yards allowed by a corner in the conference, but he's also targeted a ton, and Northwestern gave up a ton of stats. And it's like sort of similar to that Purdue thing where it's like, I think if you're just stat watching, you're going to be like, well, was he that great? And it's like, well, in this defense with all the issues that they had, like, no, I think he performed pretty well. And if you go watch him move around, this is an elite athlete as well. So no, I think this is, as you said, kind of maybe not the bigger name at the position, but an important one. And especially when you look around, it's very similar to safety, where you're losing your top three guys, basically the only three guys who played. And we don't know what the future holds with Jaleel Florence. That remains kind of a weird one.
Yep.
But like, I'm expecting this to be one of Oregon's starters at corner next year, barring these true freshmen just coming in and being like, oh my gosh, they're so incredible, they have to play right away.
Yeah, and I'm in the same boat. I think he starts somewhere where I don't know, and I would anticipate he probably has a similar impact to a Nico Reed or Brandon Johnson in their first years, or maybe a little bit better than that. And that's pretty darn good. It fills a need, and you look. I don't care what the team did. Just like I said with Thieneman, like, coaches voted him. He was on a really bad team, and coaches and media both voted him as an all-conference player. Like, that tells you something. Football is a team sport. You can't do it by yourself, and sometimes your success isn't only just because of you, and oftentimes your failures aren't just because you aren't good enough. You know, this is a guy that was put in a difficult position multiple times, and I think he's just going to be a key piece to the roster next season. Real quick, like, I'm curious what they do now moving forward with these two additions. I think they're done at safety unless like another all-world portal edition guy shows up and says, I really want to come play for you. That's going to be interesting to see how it plays out. At corner, I can kind of justify going out and getting another one. Like, I feel like if you really want one.
Yeah, it would be a luxury add at safety, I think. Because, and again, I mean, the reality is for both positions, whoever the opposite starter is from these guys is somebody who, if it's a returner at least, is not a very experienced player, just point blank. So, but I would agree that I wouldn't be opposed to adding a corner. I also think at some point you just have to rely on some of these young guys that you recruited to play, you know? So that's the tough balance here. But I think if the right players are available, you take one at either spot. I think corner probably makes a little bit more sense just because, and maybe I'm crazy, but like I kind of think like between Flowers and Woodyard and Lopa, like it seems like those three guys feel like a little bit more ready to go. Now, I guess Jaleel Florence is the ultimate. Like, I don't know what to do with him because if he
comes back, it kind of goes down in need, in my opinion.
If he comes back, I go, those are probably your 2 day one starting corners. And then what do you do with these true freshmen, you know, even redshirt freshmen like Dakota Fields, Ife Obadegwu, Rod Pleasant is still here. Like, you've got some guys that are young there, but then you've also got Florence and Johnson theoretically as your 2 starting corners. Yeah, but I would be curious to see what happens with Jaleel. There's been some social media posts that people are trying to read in probably too much. I don't necessarily have an answer, but if he's back on this team next year and is able to return to form from what he was in 23, I feel obviously very confident saying that's one of your starting corners.
I agree. Agreed. We should note Oregon will have a couple transfer portal official visits this weekend or this week. The big one probably is Mike Roach, reported from 24/7 Sports that Bear Alexander will be on campus this weekend. It will be his final visit as he makes the rounds. He was at Penn State this past weekend, made a stop at SMU. Is expected to decide shortly after he makes his trip to Eugene. And that's a guy that, look, he's had a history. He's played at Georgia after 1 year, left, landed at USC, and there was certainly some mixed reviews about his performance there at USC, but this is a really big dude, like 6'5", 330-pound dude that will plug and play Jamar Cardwell's position, which I think is probably going to be Amari Washington's spot next season. But it gives you options. It gives you a second guy. It pushes Amari to truly win the job, and Bear Alexander would play regardless. So that's probably the big one to watch. A couple of offensive linemen are coming through Eugene as well. So it looks like there's going to be another week, another wave of portal visits, and we could probably be back here on Monday again, Eric, or maybe Tuesday, talking about some future portal additions as well to the class, where how things shake out this weekend.
I'd be very curious to see how the Bear thing plays out and if that's a take or not, just because if you could pair Amari with Bear, that would be kind of a Derek Carman, Jamar Caldwell pairing that was so successful for Oregon this year. If not, there's other players maybe they look at, or they just, again, turn to some of these younger players they've been developing that haven't proven it. And then just one last thought in the portal, because I know the second segment we're going to get into some hoops. Doesn't it feeling more and more likely like quarterback's just not something that they're going to, it's not going to be a take. I mean, I just haven't seen Oregon connected with anybody yet. That doesn't mean somebody won't enter. I know Quinn Ewer's name has been floated around hypothetically.
Mateer from Washington State is expected to go in as of this morning, which he instantly becomes QB1 in the portal. But like, you've got Dante Moore, and you've recruited the position really well with Austin Novosad, Luke Moga, other underclassmen on roster, and you've got two guys coming in, and Akili Smith Jr. and JKS. Like, it just feels like they're set. And honestly, like, Mateer is a really good quarterback. Had a huge year. I think he's going to go probably to Oklahoma and probably do really big things. His OC went there.
Yeah.
His quarterback coach has also landed at Oklahoma. But if he's the number one guy, like, that speaks volumes about where the class is at from a portal edition. It was really smart by Oregon to be able to rely on, hey, let's get a younger guy and redshirt him behind Dillon Gabriel, because who knows if they knew it was going to be good or not. And if they did know, unbelievable vision to kind of project that next year's class wouldn't be as good.
Well, I was just going to say, because if that was what their projections were showing, Dante Moore would be like the no doubt number one guy in the portal, if he was theoretically in this class. So
Correct.
You see that sometimes with NFL drafts where they're like, hey, we don't think next year's quarterback draft is very good. Let's go grab someone a little earlier. That might have even been kind of the Bo Nix strategy for the Broncos. Maybe if Oregon was able to look that far in the future and kind of plan ahead, that's awfully impressive, and kind of even more credit for what they were able to do with the Dante edition last year.
All right, let's take a quick break. Let's dive into some hot basketball topics coming up next. All right, welcome back to the Autzen Audibles podcast. We wanted to talk portal, but we also wanted to talk a little bit of basketball. We did get a couple questions for a mailbag that maybe didn't necessarily warrant a standalone podcast, but we needed to talk about it. And so we're going to take that opportunity here. You got a good question for basketball.
Yeah, we'll call it like a little mini hoops mailbag. So yeah, here's a question from @LewisRoss44336. Is this the most talented basketball team Oregon has had since the Peyton Pritchard days? #Autzen Audibles. My first thought looking at this, Matt, was it blows me away that the Peyton Pritchard days were long enough ago that is like any reference point. But you look back and you go, yeah, that was half a decade ago that he was here.
Yep.
And so this question does cover several groups of Oregon basketball teams. And Matt, as the guy behind the scenes, guys watching all this stuff, like my initial instinct was like, this team's maybe the best team they've had since. But like, what's your answer to that question?
They're not the most talented team since Pritchard, because it gets lost in the shuffle. The COVID Sweet 16 team of 2021 had an NBA first-round draft pick on it, Chris Duarte, had another guy that has made it to the NBA and is on a roster, Eugene Omarui. And then they have a couple G League guys as well. Will Richardson was on that team. So in pure Talent, no. Because I don't think this team has a first-round draft pick, at least right now, on its roster. Kwame Evans was kind of viewed that way. I think it's clear his best basketball is still down the road. Nate Biddle was a 5-star, and he's having an unbelievable season this season. But if he declared for the NBA draft after this year, he probably would not be a first-round draft pick. So they don't have that, just instant, hey, this is a guy that's an NBA dude. NBA scouts are going to get him no matter what we think, he will get picked by throwing his name in the ring. Like everyone else on the roster right now, they have to have a good workout. They have to have finished the year strong to kind of just put themselves in a position to be drafted. But I do think this is probably the best team since that 1920 team. I like this unit better than the Sweet 16 team of 2021. Their depth, though, is similar. Their position versatility is similar. But they've got a big man in Biddle that's having a career year. Brandon Angel is super high efficient, and I think has really impacted just the spacing and the development of this team. And then they've got a bunch of guards that are really, really solid. And so I would argue that it's they don't have as talented of a team, but this is by far the best team. The pieces fit really well, and it's time to – I know we're – as we should be, we are all in on football. We are punch drunk with the number 1 seed and a 13-0 start and the Big Ten championship and best class in school history from a recruiting standpoint. And we can just go on and on about all these accomplishments the football team has. But you better – if you got opportunities to go or if you got opportunities to catch the basketball team play, they're a top 10 team in the country, and they're a top 10 team in the country for a reason. They're 10-1, and this is their metrics are showing out where if they win the games that they should and they don't lose any games that are surprises, we're talking about a team that could be a 2 to a 5 seed in the NCAA tournament, based upon the league that they're playing in and the schedule they've got and the wins that they have already. They're really good, so it's time to start paying attention to them as well.
And they are a banked buzzer beater, essentially, from being undefeated. We should note. I think most listening who are basketball fans have paid attention to that. If not, you don't need to go watch it because it's pretty devastating. But a very disappointing sequence after a great rally against the Bruins. What was that, last Sunday?
Like 8 days ago.
Yeah,
tough way to lose. They skirted with fire for a while with like 5 second half comeback wins. But those games are going to prove valuable in January, February, and especially March. And they walked away like knowing they probably should have won. They gave away a game, but nonetheless, this team's pretty good. And I think what's really encouraging is they still really haven't played to their full potential yet. They've had games where a majority of their team has, but Evans hasn't had. He's had one really good game, which was the first game of the year, and then he's kind of still finding his feeding there. And Shellstead hasn't had as prolific of a shooting performance as he did last season, and he's adjusting to a new role and being defended differently because he's more of a primary ball handler. And so they've got some guys that are still kind of searching for their footing and their footnotes, and they haven't played collectively as a team their best basketball yet, and they're still a top 10 team, which should tell you the potential this team has.
I think the piece that this team has, and there's a couple that probably really stand out, just because the elite center with Biddle is obviously different from what they've had. I mean, Dante, don't get me wrong, and Trolley was an incredible piece. I think what Nate is able to do and the consistency of just having him on the court now for a full season, I'm knocking on wood because we know he has had his history as well, but just the night to night knowing what you're getting from him. And that was the case when Foley was healthy. He just wasn't healthy very often. I think that's a difference. But to me, having watched this team, I just think Brandon Angel provides such a important, glue guy role from the kind of his forward position in terms of not only is he a capable scorer, capable 3-point shooter, a very efficient player, as Matt says, one of the more efficient players in the country. I just trust him to make the right decisions with the basketball when the game matters. And that isn't necessarily always been what you get from your 4-man on the court. Sometimes when Oregon went really small, it was because you'd have like, a point forward almost out there. But for him to be like a true 6'8", 6'9" guy who can be what he is defensively, be the rebounder he is, be the, impactful player, but also be someone who's just so smart and just makes the winning plays. I just think that gives me, and probably has been a pretty instrumental part in the fact that they've been able to win a lot of these close games late, is that you've got, and it's not just him, but he's the one that stands out to me when I watch that. I think that's so necessary. And it's a veteran team that has numerous guys that just kind of figure out how to make the right play. And that's not every single game. There were some issues against UCLA. That were some poor decisions that were made by some of the vets there. But most nights I watch and I go, it just feels like when the game matters, these guys defensively buckle down. I think that's been something that maybe gets overlooked a little bit. But offensively, it just feels like the possessions make sense. There's a rhythm to it, and the right guys end up getting the right shots. And that's obviously a recipe for being 10-1 and having success and beating some of these better teams in really close games, because they've had to do that now numerous times, as you say, Matt. And I just think Angel in particular steps out to me. I know some other guys out there are also obviously really important, but his addition was big when it happened, and I think it's paid off quite a bit already.
Yeah, and I think I agree with Angels. He makes all the special plays. He knows where to be. He's just that savvy vet that you've always liked to have. And for me, a big difference from this year to last year is they don't need to rely on multiple guys to play 32, 33, 34, 35 minutes. And you look at the minutes played this season, they have one guy that plays over 30 minutes a game. It's Jackson Shelstead at 31 minutes. I mean, it's barely over 30. And last season they had three guys that were all over 33, 34 minutes per game. And the big thing here is the guys that play the most minutes after Shelstead, it's Biddle and Bamba, and they're at 26. It's not like they're even close to playing 30. And the position versatility that Oregon has, it's going to get pared down at some point. Guys' minutes are going to get cut either in half or maybe just eliminated. And other players will see their usage go up as the season comes to an end here. But right now they can legitimately play 9, 10, 11 players. And when you're playing a lot of games in a row like they did previously with the Vegas trip, and when you're playing games and a guy has an off night, I mean, think about Shelstead's career, his season so far. He's been hot or he's been cold. And an unsung hero for this team has been Keyshawn Bartholomew, where he's been able to pick up when Shelstead hasn't had a good game. He has been there every step of the way to kind of shoulder the workload to help lift him up. I mean, this was basically Sunday night against Stephen F. Austin was basically the first game all year where Shelstead and Bartholomew both didn't shoot it well, had some turnovers, and didn't have like a dominating assist to turnover ratio or creation of offense for others. That was the first time in 11 games where both their point guards one of them didn't have a stellar game. I just really like the matching that they have and the cover that guys give each other, because everyone's not going to play perfect the whole year. And this is what's the difference, and why I think people are asking these questions of compared to the 1920 team, because that unit, just as much as the following team did as well, where the rosters really blended well together. And we should also note they're healthy. Like, first real injury of the season came Kwame Evans against Stephen F. Austin, and it looked really bad in the moment. But then Dana Altman said, no structural damage. It sounds like he's just going to be really, really sore for a while in terms of his knee. He looked like he may have hit knees just straight on, which is extremely painful, as we saw.
And to your point earlier about the depth, they can absorb him being out theoretically for a week or two or whatever it is. I mean, you might have a better idea on the timeline because, well, to be clear, he really wasn't playing over 20 minutes per game at this point. He'd been
15.
kind of, downsized a little bit since that kind of hot opening game. And I think that obviously not having him available could hurt them a little bit, but I don't think you go into any of what they have upcoming and go, oh man, this is going to be exponentially more difficult because Kwame is not there. And that's not to take a shot at him. I think that's more of the depth that they built this way and the kind of the smart roster building coming off a season where, frankly, they probably taught some tough lessons by in incredibly unfortunate string of injury luck. I don't even know they could have really necessarily prepared for it last year, but they certainly, I think, went into this year going, we're not going to find ourselves in a situation where we only have 5 to 7 guys for any stretch of time. Like we're gonna have more players available. So far, it's worked out, and it's been a fun team to watch. And I agree with Matt. Like I know football is going to have the attention, and this run for football could take us through almost the end of January. But I would just kind of keep an eye on the men's basketball team. They're ranked where they are for a reason. The women, if we want to do just a brief little segment here, Matt,
because they're improved.
They're improved. They maybe aren't as improved as it looked like they were about 8 games into the season, where they were ranked in the top 25 and had won a couple of big games. The Baylor win was huge at home. The Auburn win was big as well. They've got some wins against teams that are good at lower levels of competition, but I think there was kind of a coming back to earth a little bit when they lost both games in Hawaii in that tournament to Georgia Tech, which is ranked, and to South Dakota State, which is a very good mid-major program, and then coming back and losing to USC at home. That one, no one was surprised by. USC is a top 5 team with maybe the best roster in women's college basketball. So the record right now, I don't think is a huge surprise. I think, in fact, maybe it's a win or two better than I thought looking at it preseason. But I think for a moment there was a sense of like, oh man, is this team going to be like a top 15, top 20 team for parts of the season? I think probably not a top 25 team, but still a team that has aspirations to maybe make an NCAA tournament run. I know that was kind of low key the goal here. And just to not go too far down into kind of the rotational issues, but you kind of mentioned with the men's team, that they're able to play a certain number. I think the women's team almost is trying to play too many, and it's causing, there's just night to night. There's not a whole lot of consistency. And I know some of that's health related, like Filipina Che, the centers, kind of either she's able to give them 8 or 10 minutes or she's able to give them 25. And it kind of throws things out of whack with her inconsistency. And then there's a couple of the players who've been kind of in and out. And I just think they've yet to settle on their best 5 and probably their best 7, 8, 9 either. So that to me is the thing that you need to see take place. And I think this week they play 2 games against teams they should beat, Air Force and UC Irvine on Tuesday and Thursday. I think a great result for this week would be to come out of it feeling like they know their rotation, they know their answers, they know how they want to start games and how they want to end games, because then they'll start Big Ten play about 10 days after they play UC Irvine on Thursday. So to me, that's low key. Like if you're still not fully focused on the women's or the men's basketball teams, but you kind of want to follow from afar a little bit, I would say just kind of keep track of kind of what the rotations look on the women's side. Does it look like they kind of have figured out some answers? Because as of this last week, they're still kind of trying to figure out rotation-wise, like who's their starting 5, who's their first players off the bench. And those are things they need to get kind of figured out by conference play.
It feels like they've also been impacted by injury.
Totally.
Shea not being available to start the year, and then having a minute restriction. And I don't know if she's off that now or not, but
this is the issue, is it fluctuates. It's like one game she's playing 25 and she's like a difference maker. And then one game she's playing 9 and she's not involved at all. So
her availability of not being 100% like she has been the last 3 years, I think has certainly impacted probably how they want to play.
Yeah.
Sophia Bell also now being hurt or coming back is a big one. She's their best wing defender.
Wing defender. Yeah. Struggling on offense, but definitely their best wing defender.
So they're dealing with the injury bug here, and you know them better than I do, but I'm going to use an analogy and just pare it down a little bit because it's not as high of a ceiling, but they feel like kind of Penn State football, where you beat the teams you should, and you can't beat the teams that are equal in talent or better in talent. It's hard for you to pull off those wins, where maybe that's going to be enough to get you to the tournament. And I understand Penn State's a top 3 team in college football, whatever. So like pare down the expectations, but that feels kind of like what Oregon's at. Like they're a team where they play a team that's inferior, they're not going to lose. But if they play a team that's on paper better than them, it's difficult to find a path to victory.
Yeah, I think that was the thing that was theoretically encouraging early when they beat Baylor was like, here's a team that should be better that they beat. But you're right. I mean, since that win, and the Auburn game is probably the only other one. Like you do look and you go like, yeah, they've kind of just beaten up on some lower quality teams or lower conference teams, I should say, and then lost to the teams that probably should beat them. And in going into Big Ten play, if they are serious about making the NCAA tournament, let's say they finish this. I know it's non-conference plus a little bit of conference because they've already played USC, but let's just say they're 9-3 going into that. To get to the tournament, you're going to have to win double digit in the conference, and just looking at the schedule, that's going to require them to be better than that in terms of they're going to have to beat the teams they should, but there's probably at least 2 to 3 games they need to win against teams that are kind of on their level, or as you said, clearly better. And that's going to be the challenge is if they're able to do that over the course of a season. And I think this week with these 2 games will give us an idea of kind of where they're at, because these are 2 they should definitely win. And if they lose one of these games, or it's down to the end of the fourth quarter, and you kind of that could be, I think, concerning going into to start a real Big Ten play at the end of the month.
All right, that's going to do it for us here on the Autzen Audibles podcast. Thank you for listening to the show. We'll be back later this week with probably more portal talk, probably some football preview, look aheads to college football playoffs, and who knows what else could happen in the world of Oregon athletics, because it's always moving. Until the next one, you've been listening to the Autzen Audibles podcast.
Talk to you later, folks.